A must-own gold stock, K92 Mining, trading on the TSX Venture under KNT. Head of exploration is the man responsible for the largest gold discovery in history. Gold production will commence in the matter of weeks for this new company, headed up by an all-star management team. Their core project and mine was purchased by Barrick Gold at the height of the bull market in 2006 for $142 million. At the depths of the bear market, this management team swooped in and bought this project for $2 million last year. To learn more about this soon-to-be mid-tier gold producer with a cash cost estimated at a low $600 per ounce, visit futuremoneytrends.com/gold IPO. Greetings and thank you for joining us at futuremoneytrends.com. I have a great guest for you today. I actually had a chance to meet him in Houston, I believe about a year ago at a secession event. And I believe Ron Paul was also there, which it's always a pleasure to see Dr. Paul. He's a former campaign manager for Dr. Ron Paul, as well as press secretary while he was in Congress. Jeff Deist, he is heading up Mises.org. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us.
All right, thank you for having me.
Well, sir, this is certainly a year where politics are at front and center. 4 years ago, man, it was very, very exciting with what was going on with the Ron Paul movement. It was a big advancement from 2008. A lot of us probably, in fact, I was one of them. I thought all that momentum would roll right into the Rand Paul campaign. And just briefly, what are your thoughts on Rand Paul's presidential bid? Why wasn't it able to connect with Ron Paul's momentum and fire at all?
Well, I think there's a couple reasons. First is by attempting to appear more mainstream or more palatable to the average GOP primary voter, Rand actually gave away much of Ron's appeal. In other words, it was Ron's purity and his principles and his intransigence, we might even say, that made him so popular with people. When they listened to Ron talking, they could tell they weren't hearing sound bites, they weren't hearing prepared remarks. It was just Ron being completely off the cuff and brutally honest. And so that didn't necessarily translate to Rand, because Rand was much more cautious, tempered his remarks, tempered some of his positions in an attempt to triangulate and reach out to more mainstream Republicans. But he actually miscalculated, because in doing so, he lost enthusiasm, the appeal of a straight-talking Ron. And I also think that Rand and really libertarians generally, we misunderstood the degree to which there's a libertarian wing in the GOP. There really isn't just much of one. Most Republican voters, most Republicans are not particularly libertarian. They're interventionist, neoconservatives in terms of their foreign policy views. And thus, it doesn't really resonate with them. People have had two chances in early Republican primaries, New Hampshire, Iowa, South Carolina, Nevada, for instance. People have had two chances to vote for Ron Paul in 2008 and 2012. And now, in 2016, they had a chance to vote for Rand, who is certainly viewed as the libertarian end of the GOP. And in all three of those instances, they delivered underwhelming votes for the libertarian-ish or libertarian candidates. So I think the lesson we have to learn from this is that there's not really a libertarian wing of the GOP. And the idea of working within the right or working within the GOP, which has been around and has been debated in libertarian circles for many, many decades, it either hasn't worked or isn't working, but the result is the same. And I think libertarianism does not really beat in the hearts of modern conservatives. Maybe it did in Russell Kirk. Maybe it did in Senator Taft. Maybe it did in Barry Goldwater. But those days are gone.
Jeff, a lot of libertarians that I've been speaking to are torn up about voting for Gary Johnson, who that's where their heart is. But there is a big temptation with Trump, because even though Trump is not a libertarian by any means, however, at this point, after having the Ron Paul campaign with so much excitement and so much enthusiasm, but it failed to actually be able to govern, Trump it appears will turn the tables over, will cause a lot of changes, at least as far as the interventionism with the foreign policy and the current trade agreements that are essentially written by globalists. So what do you say to libertarians who their heart is with Gary Johnson, their heart is with the Libertarian Party, but they're also looking for somebody to finally go into Washington and flip the kitchen table over?
Well, I sympathize. We might say Trump's not a libertarian and doesn't call himself one. Gary Johnson's not a libertarian but does call himself one. So we could start from that premise. Look, the argument for Gary Johnson is really that you're so sick of these two parties, you just want to cast a third-party vote. And however flawed Johnson might be as an individual or as a candidate or as a person, certainly as we all are, he represents the libertarian brand. And so if you vote for Johnson, you might say, hey, in effect, I'm voting for the brand, or I'm voting for the Libertarian Party. And Johnson just happens to be the standard bearer of that this year. I guess you can make that argument. I'm not real big on political activism at the federal level. I think it's very, very hard to make real progress or to affect real change at the federal level. And I think anyone who gets elected president is going to have triangulated mightily to do so, and especially is going to have appeased some of the war hawks that exist in both parties, that exist in the defense contracting industry, that exist in that existed within lobbies on Capitol Hill. It's very hard for anybody good to be elected president, as we've seen. So I'm not so certain that Trump is really going to upset the apple cart with respect to foreign policy if in fact he prevails. But I fear that Hillary will win, and that she will win by a good 4 or 5 points, because you have to understand that while Republicans and Libertarians are great at dividing things up, the left is really good at creating a big tent. So they start really at 46% or 47% in national elections, and it's just a matter of getting from 47 to 50 or 50.1. And there's so many vested interests within that big tent. But a union truck driver who has nothing in common culturally with some left-wing feminist wouldn't like each other, wouldn't have the same friends. One spends their time in feminist circles. One spends his time in a blue-collar bar watching the New York Giants. Nothing in common, but on that day, every 4 years, they come together and vote Democrat, because that's in their immediate or in their perceived immediate self-interest to do so. And so the left is much better at cobbling together coalitions, however fractious. And that's why the Republican Party is a minority party and likely to remain one, especially when demographics sweep Texas and Florida. I mean, at some point, if Republicans don't win Texas and Florida, they're done as a national party.
Sure. And Texas, I mean, yeah, I would think it's still 2 decades away, but you never know. The Democrats are pretty good at importing people to these deep red states. Sanders and the youth. It reminded me of a time when I went to a Ron Paul rally at UCLA in 2012. It was just a sea of young people. I'm a millennial myself, and we were all out there enthusiastically supporting Ron Paul. And I looked at the Sanders campaign, and the crowd definitely looked the same. Obviously, the message couldn't be more polar opposites. They might identify many of the same problems, but Sanders' solutions are very violent. What is it that Sanders was able to tap into? And do there are even libertarians I know that actually did support him during the election. What was it that Sanders was able to tap into that really fired up the young people?
Well, it was just disaffection and the promise of something new. I think young people are tired of baby boomers, especially tired of the Clinton generation. But they're also tired of being in debt and paying a lot to go to school for degrees that don't seem to be worth very much. And let me say this in defense of millennials. When I worked for Ron Paul on Capitol Hill, we got a lot of resumes from young people. A lot of people wanted to work for Ron. And when I compared some of these young people at age 18 or 19 or 20 versus me at 18, 19, or 20. I mean, I had basically worked in a car wash and at a Ramada Inn, and I was an undergrad. I mean, whereas these kids all had, some sort of internship or some trip they'd taken to Europe, much more impressive. And the big difference is that when I'm a Gen Xer. When I graduated from college with a liberal arts degree, that did not get you into a professional job. You still had to do other things. In my case, it was go to law school. But you could, with a degree, you could go find a job, let's say at Hertz Rental Car, and work your way up into management and ultimately into a corporate job in something like that. You could go work at an Applebee's, let's say, and then work your way up into a managerial position and then into, maybe managing several restaurants or a corporate job within whatever group owns Applebee's. Those kinds of opportunities, I think, have really dried up for younger people. A lot of those jobs are being done by immigrants. They're being done by older people. So I honestly believe that millennials have it tougher in terms of their job prospects and also in terms of their debt obligations, the financial burden to go to school. And look, that anger, that angst has got to manifest itself somehow. And you and I might say, well, voting for Bernie is not the answer. It's going to make it worse. All the free stuff he's promising is going to come out of your own hide. But you can understand it. And if there's ever a time to be naive and idealistic, God, let it be in your 20s, right?
Sure.
So would I rather have Bernie than Hillary? I probably would. I'm not sure that he would be any less bellicose in foreign policy, but he might. And at this point, I would hold out hope for any candidate who's going to be less bellicose, less warmongering than the Republicans and Democrats have been for the last, 30 years.
The Black Lives Matter movement, for what I see, and I mean, I've never actually been to a rally, so I do plead ignorance on that. But there's definitely people out there, just like you were talking about, young people in general, but this happens to be Black Lives Matter, mainly worried about our criminal justice system, protesting violence against African Americans. Is their anger correct in channeling it at the police, or should their anger be channeled somewhere else and their protest be channeled somewhere else?
Well, I think it should be channeled somewhere else. I'm not so sure that Black Lives Matter is a youth-focused movement. I suppose more people who go to protests, especially protests that might get a little dicey, are going to tend to be younger. But look, here's one area where Gary Johnson's really good, and he correctly identifies, and let's give him credit for it, that the drug war is at the heart of this. I mean, the number of traffic stops or street stops of a pedestrian that begin with some drug suspicion is just enormous. And if we weren't spending all of this time trying to arrest and incarcerate individuals for having a substance that just changes your mental state like beer does, then we wouldn't have so many of these encounters that escalate into tragedies. So this constant stopping and questioning of people, which occurs more in poor neighborhoods, a lot of it can be laid at the feet of the drug war. But I can't say I'm a fan of Black Lives Matter because I think it's statist at its core. I think it's being run and driven and financed by some very bad people on the left. And I think its goal is to have us all so timid and afraid and discombobulated and worried about the state of things on our streets, our physical security as we go about our lives, that it's using hype and it's using a false fear of what's really a pretty safe society to engender support for more government, whether that's more cops, whether that's more welfare, whether that's more government education, whatever shibboleths the left and now the right increasingly call for to eradicate poverty, which create more poverty. I think ultimately Black Lives Matters, whether it's intentionally a bad or it's just going to be bad in effect, I think ultimately most people behind it want more government. So you can hardly say that more government's going to lead to a less violent society.
Yeah, it's a constant cycle. The government makes these people victims, and then they ask the government for help. It's like a Stockholm syndrome. Brexit. Let's talk about the economy. Was it a significant game changer in the global monetary system, in your opinion? Do you think this is ultimately going to lead to the breakup of even the European currency?
Well, I think the European currency will break up, but I don't think it will be because of Brexit. Yes, I think Brexit was an earthquake, albeit largely a symbolic one, but symbolism can be important. I had brunch this past weekend with an American friend who's from England, and he said they'll never let this happen. They'll find ways to they'll use subterfuge to sort of nullify this vote without openly nullifying it. But I do think Brexit was something that very few people saw coming even a few months back. I think that it made elites very, very unhappy. I think it represents, at least symbolically, the biggest blow to globalism and centralization since the fall of the Soviet Union. So in that sense, I think libertarians should celebrate it. I think we should treat it as a victory. And I think this idea like, well, Jeff, your little local government in your town or your county or your state, or in the case of the UK, in Westminster, can be just as oppressive, if not worse, than some faraway government. So this is just changing things and shifting gears. This is no great libertarian victory. As a matter of fact, the Brits are more statist and more protectionist and worse on trade than the European Union ministers in Brussels. And to all this, I say, nonsense. It is always a good thing to break up the turf that any particular gang claims authority over. It is always a good thing to reduce the size and scope of a government. It's always better to have to deal with a power that's close to you. Do people, if you live in a small town, your mayor has to run into you from time to time. So I really, really believe that decentralization of political power is not a panacea. It's not going to create a utopia. But at this point, short of violence, I see decentralization of political power as the last best hope for the people to live peaceably together when they see the world very differently. To say, hey, San Francisco, maybe you need different rules about how you pay for health care than Auburn, Alabama. And let's not use violence and force against each other. Maybe San Francisco needs different rules for gay marriage than Baghdad, Iraq. It may not create a utopia. Nothing can. But I think that we'd all argue that the breakup of the former Soviet Union into Russia and then a bunch of smaller countries, a step forward. So at this point, we'll take the victories where we can get them. How's that?
Absolutely. And then last question: do you think we'll see a Texit?
I don't, because look, Texas could absolutely exist on its own. It would be one of the largest economies in the world. I think it would be like 15th largest. Correct me if I'm wrong. It has major ports. It has tons of oil and natural gas. It has a huge workforce, tons of universities, a sort of a tech town in Austin, an oil town in Houston, wealth for capital, no state income tax, which of course would be a different thing if we're not under the auspices of the federal government. So there's no mechanical or logistical reason why it could not happen. The reason I don't think it can happen is just because of the scars that we all still bear from the Civil War, and this idea that the Supreme Court has decided against secession, and the fact that there's so many U.S. military bases in Texas. I think the whole thing just is too complex. And I also think at the end of the day, the number of Texans who would actually support it would be a minority.
Yeah. I got to say, being from California and never seeing a Californian flag in my life out in front of somebody's yard, and then coming to Texas, and there are many Texan flags and stars on almost every house. The attitude here and the state pride is different than anything I've ever seen. Totally foreign. I've been a Texan. I've been a Texan for 2 years now, and I got to say, I came here an anarchist, but I'm a pretty happy Texan.
Well, I think when Texans travel internationally and someone says, "Where are you from?" I think they say Texas, not America, which is, where you could go anywhere in the world and people know what Texas is.
All right, Jeff Deist of Mises.org. Check it out, guys. It has writing. It gets posted daily. You can also subscribe to their email list for free. And you're basically getting the best free market thinkers out there. And, a lot of newsletters and different companies would charge a lot of money for this type of education. And you can get easy access to people like Jeff Deist and Tom Woods. Jeff, thank you so much for your time.
Hey, thank you for having me.